All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the Battle of First Bull Run, the very first major battle of the Civil War.
Oh, this is a good one.
It is, right? Picture this. July 1861, Washington, D.C. is buzzing, and Union troops are marching off, totally confident they'll be back home soon after a quick win.
Yeah, everyone thought that, didn't they?
Exactly. They thought it would be a breeze. But this battle, just 30 miles from Washington, really changed everything. It showed everyone on both sides how brutal this war was going to be. Our source for this deep dive is an episode from the American History Hit podcast where they interviewed David Duncan, who's the president of the American Battlefield Trust. It's a great listen.
The Trust does some amazing work preserving these historic battlefields.
Absolutely. Okay, so both sides, especially the Union, they really underestimated what they were getting into, huh?
Oh, yeah, big time. They thought capturing the Confederate capital, Richmond, would just end the whole thing right then and there, like one and done.
Wow, they really thought it would be that easy. What about the Confederates? What were they fighting for?
Well, they had just declared their independence, right? So they were determined to defend that new sovereignty they had just claimed. They wanted to prove their strength to the North and really show the world they weren't messing around.
Right, right. It makes you think about all that Southern pride and the whole honor thing they had going on, like those romanticized Southern gentlemen you read about in the literature of that time.
Yeah, definitely. The South was absolutely convinced they had the better military. Their soldiers were more valiant, more skilled in combat, maybe because of all those romantic ideals about chivalry and honor.
So both sides had their reasons and maybe a little bit of wishful thinking too, huh?
Definitely some wishful thinking.
Could tell me, why was Manassas Junction so important for this battle? And by the way, our source also calls it Bull Run. What's with the two different names?
Oh, that's interesting. Manassas Junction is what the Confederates called it, and Bull Run is the Union name. And the reason for that is the location itself was strategically important. See, it had these rail links that were essential for moving troops and supplies around. And the naming difference is actually a Civil War thing.
Okay, I'm listening.
The Union named battles after nearby bodies of water. So in this case, Bull Run, a stream nearby. But the Confederates, they used the names of towns, like Manassas.
Huh. So even the battle names show how divided the country was.
Totally.
Okay, let's talk about the leaders. Who was calling the shots on each side?
All right, well, on the Union side, you've got General Irvin McDowell, West Point grad, had experience in the Mexican-American War, but there's a but.
Oh.
He was leading an army that was basically, well, pretty inexperienced. Most of them were volunteers, civilians who suddenly found themselves in the middle of this huge mess.
Oh, wow. So they're totally unprepared. And what about the Confederate side?
They had General P.G.T. Beauregard. Now he was a skilled military leader, and he was determined to prove just how strong the Confederacy was.
Beauregard. Yeah, that's a name that sticks with you. Our source mentions another important Confederate leader, too. What about him?
Oh, you mean General Joseph E. Johnston. He was actually stationed in the Shenandoah Valley at first, but because McDowell's plans got delayed.
Ah, those delays.
Yeah, those delays actually allowed Johnston to bring his troops over to reinforce Beauregard, and that really changed the outcome of the battle.
Oh, wow. Delays can be a game changer in war.
They really can.
So remind me, what was McDowell's initial plan? What was he hoping to achieve?
Well, he had this ambitious plan, a flanking maneuver to surprise Beauregard's left flank.
A surprise attack, huh?
Exactly. He wanted to catch them completely off guard before Johnston could arrive with reinforcements.
Makes sense, but as we know, there were delays. What happened that messed things up?
Well, there was a skirmish, a smaller fight, at Blackburn's Ford on July 17th. That made McDowell rethink his strategy, which, unfortunately, gave Johnston the time he needed to get to Beauregard, using those rail lines we talked about.
Those railroads again. So, July 21st, the big day, the two armies finally clash. What happened?
Well, even with that setback, McDowell managed to pull off his flanking maneuver and started pushing back the Confederate forces.
Wow. Sounds like it was going well at first.
It was, but remember, both sides had a lot of inexperienced soldiers, and that really impacted how the whole thing played out.
How so? What did the fighting actually look like? Paint us a picture.
Chaos. Just pure chaos. Close-range fighting, confusion everywhere, and then you have friendly fire and soldiers deserting because they couldn't handle the pressure. It was a mess.
Oh, man. Can't even imagine being in the middle of that. Was there a specific moment or a place where the tide started to turn?
Yeah, Henry Hill became a crucial point. This is where Confederate General Thomas Jackson earned his nickname, Stonewall.
Ah, yes, Stonewall Jackson. The name says it all. So what happened there?
He just would not budge. He held his ground against wave after wave of Union attacks. This stand, and that famous quote, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall," really turned the tide of the battle.
It's incredible how these little moments can change the course of history. Anything else contribute to that shift in momentum?
Well, right when the Union was starting to get tired and, lose their spirit, J.E.B. Stuart, he arrives with the Confederate cavalry.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and that just throws the Union into even more chaos.
So what happens next? The Union, do they regroup?
They try, but they're exhausted, and under so much pressure, they start to retreat, and it quickly turns into a full-blown rout. Soldiers are panicking, even civilians get caught in the frenzy. It's a disaster.
Wow. So the Confederates win, but I'm guessing it wasn't without a cost.
You're right. Big victory for the Confederacy, but both sides suffered heavy losses. The casualties, about 5,000 out of over 60,000 troops, might seem small compared to later battles, but it was still a brutal reality check for everyone involved.
It's easy to forget each casualty is a person, a life lost, a family forever changed. This must have been a huge wake-up call for the North.
Oh yeah, the Union was stunned. It forced them to face the fact that this war was going to be serious, and probably a lot longer than they had thought.
So how did they respond? Did they just give up?
No way. Lincoln knew they needed a more disciplined professional army. So he brings in General George McClellan to take charge.
McClellan, the guy known for his meticulous planning and drilling.
Exactly. But that meticulousness would also cause some problems down the line.
Yeah.
But that's a story for another time.
Okay, good point. So we've got this pivotal battle, First Bull Run, that really exposed the true nature of the war and forced both sides to adapt.
Right. It set the stage for everything that followed. And it showed just how high the stakes were in this conflict.
And David Duncan, our expert from the American Battlefield Trust, he really emphasizes how important it is to preserve these battlefields, being there on the actual ground where it all happened.
It connects you to history in a way nothing else can.
It makes you think, what would it have been like to be there that day? Those civilians who went out for a picnic expecting a show, then suddenly they're caught in the middle of this brutal retreat.
Yeah, they thought they were going to watch a parade.
Mm.
And then they saw the true face of war. Can you imagine how that experience must have changed their whole perspective on the war?
It's a powerful question to think about. How would that kind of experience change your view of war and your place in it?
Absolutely. First Bull Run wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point that changed the course of the war and the nation forever. It's a story that deserves to be remembered and understood.
And we've only just scratched the surface. We'll dive even deeper into the aftermath and how both sides adapted their strategies in part 2 of this deep dive. Stay tuned. Okay, so we left off talking about the First Battle of Bull Run. It was a real turning point, right? Everyone had to take a step back and reevaluate what they were doing.
Absolutely. For the Union, it was a wake-up call. Big time. They just weren't prepared. The troops weren't trained enough, not enough supplies. And, they went into that battle thinking it would be easy.
And that's why Lincoln decided to bring in General McClellan. He wanted to fix those issues.
Right. McClellan was known for being a stickler for organization and training. He really got the Union Army into shape.
He was like the ultimate drill sergeant, right? Transforming them into a real fighting force. But, like we mentioned before, all that meticulous planning sometimes had its downsides.
That's true. He was so focused on preparing for everything that he sometimes missed opportunities to, take the initiative and attack. It's a tough balance.
Totally. So what about the Confederacy? They won. How did that victory affect their strategy for the rest of the war?
Well, as you can imagine, winning that first major battle gave them a huge boost. Confidence went through the roof. They really believed in their military superiority and their cause. But there was a downside to all that early success.
Oh, what do you mean?
It kind of made them a little complacent. They started underestimating the Union, didn't realize how determined the North was to win, and how much they could learn from their mistakes.
So it's like winning early on can make you overconfident.
Exactly. It can make you blind to your weaknesses.
That's a great point. Okay, let's talk about some of the specific tactics used at First Bull Run. Anything stand out to you in terms of innovation or, blunders?
One thing that really sticks out is how the Confederates used railroads. Johnston was able to reinforce Beauregard so quickly because of those rail lines, and that was a big reason why they won.
It's amazing how technology, even back then, could change the whole game.
Absolutely. First Bull Run really showed how important railroads were going to be in this war.
Okay, now for the blunders. What mistakes had the biggest impact on the battle?
Well, for the Union, that delay after the skirmish at Blackburn's Ford was a big one. McDowell should have kept moving, but he hesitated. That gave Johnston the time he needed to get to Beauregard.
It's like that saying, time is of the essence, especially in war.
For sure. And then there's just the overall chaos of the battle. So many inexperienced soldiers on both sides. It led to missed opportunities, friendly fire, a lot of unnecessary casualties.
Yeah, it's easy to forget how messy and unpredictable battles can be.
Definitely.
You know, we've talked a lot about the big picture, but I'm curious about the individual soldiers. Any unsung heroes, stories of incredible courage that we should know about?
It's hard to single out individuals in such a huge, chaotic battle. But Jackson's stand on Henry Hill, where he got his nickname Stonewall, that really shows you the kind of courage and determination people had on both sides.
Yeah, him holding his ground against all those Union attacks, that's an incredible image. But what about all the other acts of bravery, big and small, that might not have been recorded?
You're right. There must have been countless acts of courage, of selflessness that we'll never know about. But those stories, even though they're lost to history, they're still a part of the human story of this war.
Exactly. History isn't just about dates and battles. It's about the people who lived through those events.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, before we move on, any key takeaways from this part of our deep dive?
Well, we saw how First Bull Run was a turning point for both sides.
Hmm.
It shattered the illusion of a quick victory and forced everyone to get real about how long and bloody this war was going to be.
Right, they had to adapt and change their strategies.
And it showed how important technology was becoming, the need for decisive leadership,
Yeah,
and how unpredictable war can be.
absolutely. What about you? What stands out to you the most from what we've discussed so far?
Good question. What about you?
I think what really gets me is how this one battle, First Bull Run, set the stage for the entire war. It's like a preview of everything that was to come. You see the determination, the mistakes, the brutality, but also the resilience that would define the next 4 years.
Yeah, I agree. And it reminds us that even events that seem small at the time can have huge ripple effects.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still more to uncover. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the lasting legacy of First Bull Run and how it shaped the rest of the Civil War. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've been deep diving into the Battle of First Bull Run, and it's been quite a journey. We've seen how everyone thought it'd be a quick win, then the chaos of the actual battle and the aftermath. It really was a pivotal moment. But now I'm thinking, how did First Bull Run affect the rest of the Civil War? What kind of lasting impact did it have?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's safe to say this battle really set the stage for the next 4 years of fighting. It made everyone realize this wasn't going to be a quick or easy war.
Right. It shattered all those illusions people had. It was a reality check for both sides. They had to understand that this war was going to be a long and difficult struggle. Everyone involved, soldiers, politicians, even the civilians, had to rethink what this war really meant. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely, especially for the Union. First Bull Run showed them some serious weaknesses they had to fix, like right away. They had to completely overhaul their military, their structure, their training, their leadership, everything.
Yeah, that's where General McClellan comes in, right? He was appointed because of what they learned at Bull Run. He really transformed the Union Army.
He did. He focused on discipline and drill, which, some people criticize him for being too cautious. But you can't deny it. He made the Union Army a professional force. They were actually capable of winning.
So, a Confederate victory actually helped the Union win the war in the long run. That seems kind of strange, doesn't it?
It does, but it shows you how war works sometimes. Sometimes those early setbacks, even losing, can make you stronger. You innovate, you adapt, and in the end, you come out on top.
That's a good point. What about the Confederacy? They won at First Bull Run. How did that shape their path in the war? Were there any downsides to that early victory?
Oh yeah, there were definitely some downsides. The win at First Bull Run was great for morale. The South was super confident, but it also made them overconfident. They really believed they were better militarily, and they kind of forgot about some of their weaknesses.
It's like they got a little too cocky.
Exactly. And they didn't see how strong the North was, how determined they were, and how much they could learn from their mistakes.
It's a good reminder that winning, especially early on, can be misleading. So it was like a victory that set them up for failure later.
In a way, yes. Their early success hid the fact that they were at a disadvantage. Fewer resources, smaller population, and they really needed help from other countries. Those are big problems, especially in a long war.
Okay, let's switch gears a little. I want to talk about the impact of First Bull Run on the civilians, on how they saw the war. Remember those people from Washington who went out to watch the battle like it was a picnic?
Oh, yeah, how could I forget? They were in for a rude awakening.
Right. They thought they'd see a parade, but then they're right there in the middle of this chaotic retreat, wounded soldiers everywhere. They saw the brutality of war up close. Must have been shocking.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that experience wasn't limited to just them. Newspapers all over the country, both North and South, were publishing really vivid descriptions of the battle. People were reading about the fighting, the casualties, the real human cost of war. It was eye-opening.
Yeah, it was like the war was suddenly real for everyone. It wasn't this distant thing anymore. It was happening right in their backyards.
Right. It showed people what war was really like. It forced them to face the truth about what those soldiers were going through on the front lines.
So, First Bull Run wasn't just a turning point militarily, but also for how everyone, the whole country, thought about the war.
Absolutely. It changed how the nation saw the conflict. They realized it was going to be much longer, much more brutal, and much more important than they had ever imagined.
It's almost like the whole country lost its innocence that day.
That's a good way to put it. And that loss of innocence, the realization of what war really meant, that shaped everything that came after. It changed the course of the war and how American society would develop for generations.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's clear First Bull Run was a defining moment in American history. What would you say is the most important legacy of this battle? What should our listeners really take away from all of this?
I think First Bull Run showed us that even battles that seem small or insignificant can have a huge impact. It can shape the course of history in ways we don't even realize at the time.
And like David Duncan reminds us, it's so important to preserve these battlefields. They're a tangible link to our past.
All right, they allow us to connect with history in a really powerful way. We can learn from the mistakes of the past and honor those who fought and died.
Well said. And for our listeners, we leave you with this. Imagine standing on the battlefield at Manassas, feeling the weight of history all around you. What stories would you hear? What lessons would you learn? How does this battle change your understanding of the Civil War and what it means to us today? Keep those minds curious, everyone, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.